right, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Aubrey, for that very generous presentation or introduction. And it clearly, in this room, I pale compared to Aubrey and Dr. Church in terms of their expertise and passion in the whole rejuvenation world. And I always love coming to a rejuvenation conference and knowing that the average age is definitely not in your 20s. So let's get going. My goal here is to get through the slides fairly quickly and have a conversation, which is the more interesting side of the equation. And I'm not going to be going into the science and detail of longevity because you've had some extraordinary experts in that. I want to talk about a little bit about mindset in doing impossible things, and a little bit about what the tool set coming that are enabling extraordinary things this decade, because I pinch myself in how excited I am to live in this time. Right? So I have a constant conversation and refrain with people that must be living in a virtual world, because it's just too convenient that we're alive right now during this extraordinary period of time. So one of the challenges we have whenever we're talking to somebody about big concepts, sort of like moonshot thinking, human longevity, asteroid mining, going to the moon, all of these things, is that most of us think in local and linear terms. And the realization is that the hardware and software of our brains evolved on the savannas of Africa hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago, and adapted to the environment we're in. And we have cognitive biases that trap us in our local and linear thinking. Right? Back then, the world was very local. Everything that affected you was within a day's walk. Things did not change generation to generation, century to century, millennium to millennium. Things were pretty much constant. Life of your great-grandparents, you, your kids, their kids, nothing changed. And of course, that's not the way the world is today. Today, the world is global and exponential. Something happens in China or India, you know about it seconds later. Your computers know about it microseconds later. And the world isn't local, it's global in a very palpable fashion. And things are not changing century to century or decade to decade. They're changing year to year. You know, an event occurs and the world is transformed instantly. So these two curves represent a lot of where we are. That red curve is us. You know, we haven't had a hardware or software upgrade in some 50,000 years. The yellow line is our technology that we're using. AI, robotics, synthetic biology, digital medicine, all of these fields are transforming and growing at exponential rates. And the difference between those two are either disruptive stress or disruptive opportunity, depending on your point of view. Right? So I use the example of disruptive stress with Kodak. So Kodak in 1996 is a $28 billion market cap company, 140,000 employees, top of its game. And back 20 years earlier, in 1976, Kodak had invented the digital camera. Right? They came up with this technology. They had in their labs, they had the patents, had the first mover advantage. But when it was shown to their board of directors, to their executive team, they said, we're in the, in the papers and chemicals business, not in the electronics business. And of course, they ignored this. And the consequence was that in 2012, Kodak goes bankrupt. Put out of business by the very technology that they had invented themselves. And this concept that, if you're not paying attention to exponential growth, it can disrupt you or your business is a very critical one. But to put sort of an exclamation point at the end of this example, I point out in the same year that Kodak files for bankruptcy, another company, also in the imagery business, called Instagram, is acquired by Facebook for $1 billion, but they've got 13 employees. And the difference between a linear thinking company like Kodak and an exponential one like Instagram is what's going on right now. And I've given this a name. I call this the new Kodak moment, when a linear thinking company is put out of business by exponential technologies. So some stats to give you a sense, and I'm sharing this with you really just to get a sense of the change of pace and the excitement for being alive in this decade. So there's new kinds of companies that are emerging today. And these are obviously information companies, data companies that are growing at a most extraordinary rate. So in 1979, General Motors was at the peak of its size, 840,000 employees, $11 billion in earnings in 2012 dollars. Compare that, if you would, to Google in 2012, which has 38,000 employees, 1/20th the size of GM, but $14 billion in earnings. And that juxtapositioning for me is a really important realization that there are new kinds of information tech companies emerging that are fundamentally very different. This is from Mellon School of Business. In 10 years, it's predicted that 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist. And I share this with companies, when I give a keynote for Muhtar Kent at Coca-Cola, or my friend Jeff Immelt at GE, or whatever it might be, and say, there is importance to realize that we're living in a very different world where the rate of change is extraordinary. Put differently, if you were an S&P 500 company in the 1920s, you had a 67-year average stay on the S&P. If you started a company in the 1920s, you would milk that for 67 years. Today, you start a company, and you have an average stay of 15 years. You're MySpace, worried about Facebook, worried about whatever's next. And what that translates to is this fascinating rate of change. The rate at which we're going from I've got an idea to I run a billion-dollar company is exploding, right? We've got this whole slew of companies. A company like, Palmer Luckey at Oculus Rift that starts, raises a couple $1 million on Kickstarter, and then has a $2 billion takeout, 12 months, 14 months later. So I study this. I study this at a university 10 minutes from here called Singularity University. I commend it all to you. It's backed by Google and 3D Systems and Autodesk and NASA and a whole bunch of companies. We run a variety of programs. We run programs for graduate students, and the summer graduate student program just wrapped. And we ask our graduate students, start a company, a product, or service that can positively impact the lives of 1 billion people within a decade. And Sebastian, who's here, actually has a booth. You should go and visit the Organ Preservation Alliance. It came out of SU's, one of 10 to 9th plus companies, about preserving and creating organs. We run executive programs that run 1 week. And then we run programs for Fortune 200 companies, Coca-Cola, Hershey's, Google, SAP, Dow Chemical, and so forth. And this is a program where we have every 6 months, we bring in the executive teams from these companies, and we show them what's in the lab today and coming to market in 2-5 years. Because these are the technologies that will disrupt or transform. So we teach at SU, if you come at the executive program, IPP, or graduate, we teach about computers, networks, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, digital medicine. But we also teach about the kinds of capabilities we get in this hyper-connected world. Crowdfunding, incentive competitions, data mining, crowd creativity, DIY communities. These are the mechanisms for leveraging solution power inside your companies. So the realization is that we are wired for local and linear thinking. We don't think exponentially. So the question is, what does exponential thinking feel like, right? And if I were to say to you, take 5, or 10 or 30 linear steps, in 30 linear paces, right, I end up 30 meters away, from here to the back door. But if I say to you, take 30 exponential steps, exponential doubling being a simple, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and 30 exponential doublings, unless you've got it memorized, you don't realize you're now 1 billion meters away. Put differently, you've gone around the planet 26 times. And that disconnect between 30 linear steps and 30 exponential steps is the world that we're living in right now, and why exponential technologies are fundamentally catching people off guard and causing a massive rate of disruption, of sort of evolutionary, sort of Darwinian evolution going on. All of that's being driven by this curve. This is, if you would, the growth of computational power over time. Along the bottom is 110 years. On the left-hand axis, the amount of computational power $1,000 in constant year dollars could buy you. It's on a log scale, and as this audience would no doubt know, on a log scale, exponential growth is a straight line, right? And this is curving upwards, which tells us that the rate at which these computers are getting faster is itself getting faster. It's also damn smooth. You don't see World War I, World War II, a recession, a depression, a boom time on this. We're fundamentally using faster computers to build faster computers to build faster computers, and it's likely to continue. And if it does, what you get is interesting, to say the least, right? The 2010 processor driving this from Intel, this presentation, is calculating at 10 to the 11th cycles per second, 100 billion calculations in a second, which is extraordinary, right? More computational power than the US had in the 1970s. And by the way, when you throw your latest, your last cell phone in the drawer and you think nothing about it, you're throwing away a supercomputer that every government on the planet would have killed for to have had 30 years ago, but we think nothing about just disposing. I've got like 5 or 6 old cell phones in my drawer. That's extraordinary. 2023, 9 years from now, the average computational power of a computer is now 10 to the 16th cycles per second, which is what your visual and auditory cortex does pattern recognition with. And then, another 25 years later, now the average $1,000 buys you the computational power of 9 billion humans. And now your kids' homeworks get really easy. And it really is the fundamental growth medium of all the other exponential technologies that are growing on top of this. And so as I teach about exponential technologies, I think of them in what I call the 6 Ds of exponentials. And I'll share these with you one second and go about more detail. So the first is anything that becomes digitized. Biology's gotten digitized, medicine's gotten digitized, manufacturing's digitized. It enters a period of deceptive growth, right? So if I were to say to you, how many of you are familiar with 3D printing? Raise your hand, right? You all are. How many of you were familiar with 3D printing 10 years ago? Raise your hand. 20 years ago, right? It's a 35-year-old technology. When the first work was being done on 3D printing was 35 years ago, but it was in very deceptive, very slow period of growth until, over the last 5 years, it really has become disruptive, where the interface and the price performance, and when it becomes disruptive, it dematerializes, demonetizes, and democratizes industries. And let me take a second and explain what that means, because it's what we help to do in the healthcare industry. So the first is, what is dematerialization? How does exponential technologies dematerialize, physically take things and disappear them? And this is the best image. 20 years later, all of these things now fit in your pocket, right? I don't carry a GPS on the dashboard of my car anymore. It's dematerialized into this, as has a flashlight, a phone, a video camera, a still camera, a record collection, a book collection. All these things have physically dematerialized into bits on my phone. And this thing will dematerialize into my clothing and into the walls and fabrics of our environment. I could be carrying this thing around for much longer. And when things become dematerialized, they also become demonetized. What does that mean? Do you guys remember what taxis are? So Uber is dematerializing and demonetizing taxi fleets. Skype long distance, Amazon the bookstores, Google research libraries, Airbnb hotel chains, right? I mean, crazy. Airbnb, which doesn't own a single piece of physical structure, probably they own their office, is worth more now than Hyatt hotels. And Craigslist demonetized the classifieds, took the money out of the newspapers and put it into the consumers' pockets, crushed the newspaper industry. The final thing is democratization. Once things have demonetized and dematerialized, they democratize. They are available to 1 billion people in Africa. The ability for something to literally go global. Today, if I'm starting a company, I can reach 1 billion people in Africa. That's insane. I'd have to have been Muhtar Kent from Coca-Cola or Jeff Immelt from GE to be able to reach that broad an audience. Today I can be a kid in a garage and do that. So, as I mentioned, Moore's law, which by the way is only the 5th paradigm of that curve that I showed you over the last 110 years, but Moore's law is fundamentally the underpinning for a whole slew of other technologies. It's the growth medium. It's the foundation, if you would, for sensors and networks, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, digital medicine, nanomaterials, AI. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of where these technologies are today. I'm going to be sharing with you in about 7 minutes what we cover in 7 days in the SU executive program. And if you're interested in Singularity University, Sebastian can tell you about it. Any other SU grads in the audience here? Perfect. Share SU with the audience here, and it's Singular. Candy for the mind, yes. It's singularityU.org. But let me share with you, a little bit about AI. And the notion is the best example. I mean, we all know Siri, and that's great. But 2 years ago, and this is oh so 2 years ago, right? IBM demonstrated Watson, their supercomputer. And to demonstrate Watson, what Mike Roden and his team did, Mike's the senior VP who runs the Watson program at IBM, basically decided to go up against the top 2 Jeopardy champions. The guy had won the most games, the guy had won the most amount of money. And it's extraordinary what they pulled off. Now, during this competition, Watson was not hooked up to the internet. Right? It had downloaded Wikipedia and was able to process 1 million books per second. And when you're watching the video I'm going to show you, what it's doing is it's trying to understand the nuance of the question. And then it's searching its memory banks, it's searching the font of knowledge it has, and coming up with probabilistic answers. And what you'll see is like its top 3 answer concepts. And then it chooses the one that has the highest probability. And let me show you a video and let's talk about it afterwards, because I want you to think about the power that AI has in reinventing medicine, reinventing biology, reinventing research. Because we only can look at the data in one single cortex. If you've got a really great partner, you can play jazz and maybe share a couple of cortici, whatever. Anyway, but what Watson can do is download the knowledge of millions of people and be able to equally search and gather and correlate data from all of that. So let's watch Watson in action.
Ken, you're in the first position. Please make a selection.
Oh, I've never said this on TV. Chicks dig me for 200, please, Jimmy.
Kathleen Kenyon's excavation of this city, mentioned in Joshua, showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
This mystery author and her archaeologist hubby dug in hopes of finding the lost Syrian city of Urkesh. Watson?
Who is Agatha Christie?
Correct. Watson?
Who is Mary Leakey?
You're right. Watson?
What is Crete?
Yes.
Let's finish Chicks Dig Me.
Edmel?
And I'm sure they do. So what was IBM Watson? IBM Watson, again, was a computer a quarter the size of the stage. Some 2,800 Core 7 processors, a bunch of RAM, could read 200 million pages of Wikipedia downloaded. And what IBM has done since, over the last 2 years, is basically ported Watson to the cloud and created an open API that entrepreneurs, and some of you may be working on this, can use Watson. And they now have sent Watson to medical school. You've read about that, and they've downloaded the font of knowledge of medical texts. Because when I went to medical school years ago, right, I knew I'd forgotten everything by the time I graduated. I've got a memory like a sieve, and the notion of being able to keep up with it or have a single human being understand what comes out of a single physiological exam is insane. It's impossible to do. But the notion today is Watson and its nth derivatives will be available to anyone with a cell phone. You can call up Watson and have a conversation and be able to say, well, what do you think I should be doing about this molecule? Or which molecule has the right, sort of characteristics? Or what disease do you think this sounds like? And imagine being able to have Watson understand what you're asking, search through its memory banks, and give you an answer, whether you're a billionaire in Manhattan or a teenager in Mumbai. Talk about sort of the democratization, right? Because that's what Google is like. Think about the fact that the kid on a smartphone in the middle of, Nigeria has got the same access to knowledge that Larry Page has using Google here in Mountain View, or at least I think he does. But that's this flattening of technology's capabilities. This is the guy at Kodak who invented digital camera, Stephen Sasson. And you have to imagine Stephen walking into the board of directors of Kodak with this thing about the size of a small toaster going, here it is, the future of Kodak, right? It takes 0.01 megapixel images, 30 of them. Cost $10,000, 4 pounds. And Kodak going, no, we're in the paper and chemicals business. We make beautiful high-resolution images. This is a toy for kids. But what was not understood was that 0.01 becomes 0.02, 0.04, 0.08. That doubling in the early days is deceptive, right? It looks like a straight line. It looks like 0. But now, all of a sudden, it explodes. We have 10, 20, 30, 50 megapixel cameras. And today, 30 years later, we have cameras that are 1 billion times better. 1,000 times better resolution, 1,000 times cheaper, 1,000 times smaller, 1 billion times better. But this is so today, right? It doesn't stop here, and this is where most of us get trapped, where we don't think about the fact that it continues past where it is today. Because what's it going to be like in 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years? Is it going to be sort of the optical systems we're going to be having in our clothing is an insect eye, or in microdrones flying around, or in every fabric produced? So what's 1 billion times better than our cameras today look like in 30 years? This is a first IMU from the kinds of systems that took us to the moon, right? 50 pounds, tens of millions of dollars. And this is the equivalent today, right? $1 on a chip on your phone. But this is, again, so today. So what's it going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years? It's going to be molecular in size in your clothing. Think about the fact that in the future, everything we are doing has velocity and state vectors associated with it. When you pick up your fork to eat, we know exactly how quickly you ate it, right, and what you're doing. This is the first GPS. 53 pounds, $120,000. Imagine this on the dashboard of your car. And of course, here's a GPS today. $5 on a chip in your phone. My point here is that sensors are exploding. We're living into a world of anticipated trillion sensors. My friends at Cisco talk about the Internet of Everything. We have 12 billion connected devices going to 50 billion to 100 billion, and those connected devices each have a panoply of sensors on them. And we're heading towards a world where you're going to be able to know anything you want, anytime you want, where everything is being imaged, everything is being sensed constantly. And you're going to be able to query this. And that kind of interesting vision of the future is what I get excited about, where we have perfect knowledge everywhere all the time. And as you're designing new companies, as you're thinking about these things, you have to be thinking about where things are going to be 3 or 5 years from now, not where things are today. When I met the founders of Siri, when they were at one of the early ISU events, they said when we designed Siri, we knew that the capability didn't exist today. And we were designing for what would exist in 3 years. So the question is, are you, when you're thinking about your next products or services, are you thinking about where things will be in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years? Because if you build a company based on the technology today, by the time you launch it, it's out of date. So that's sensors. Let's talk about robots. Anybody know what this is a photo of? Tesla. Yeah, Tesla plant. Anybody see the carbon-based payload in the image? So we're living into a time of extraordinary, the robots are coming, the robots are coming, the robots are coming. And let me share with you just a few interesting robots. This is a little bit old, but here's Honda with its robot. Serving you drinks. We have just an explosion in robots coming down the pike. And something epic happened in the last quarter of last year, which was that a search company bought 8 robotic companies. All right, so Andy Rubin, who started Android up in Boston and came to Google, buys 8 robot companies that I know of. God knows how many more robots are on acquisition. And so what's a search company doing buying robots? And let me share with you just one of those companies that bought, Boston Dynamics, a friend of mine, Mark, runs. And let me share some of the interesting robots that are in their sort of menagerie of robots. So Petman was designed to go into hazardous environments and be able to go into a radiation plant, a burning building, whatever the case might be. Kind of spooky seeing this guy walk down University Avenue. And Mark focuses on limb movement, on the biomechanics of moving animals. Here's Wildcat. And you guys have seen this video of Big Dog being kicked, right? Look at the reflexes that he exhibits. The last thing I want is to go for a walk through the woods and see this thing coming at me. And of course, this is also a robot. This is Google's autonomous car, one of the early versions of it, with Larry in the front, Sergey and Eric. And that thing on the roof, this LiDAR, this laser imaging radar, is a sensor, right? But this sensor is generating 750 megabytes of data per second. 750 megabytes per second. And as it's going down the road, it is seeing everything. Everything. It's seeing a person being pickpocketed, a squirrel climbing up a tree, a window being opened. And now imagine not one of these, but millions of these cars on the road. There will never be a time where there will not be everything captured. Privacy is dead. Long live privacy. If you thought it wasn't dead, it's gone. But I don't know if you've ever driven inside a Google car. Anybody here driven inside a Google car? So I've had a chance to drive a few times. Let me share with you a video of what it looks like. Not a normal drive on the 101 here, but the car doing a slalom course. Excuse the profanities.
Oh my goodness. Go is the right word.
Holy shit. Holy shit. There's no fucking hands on that wheel. Oh my god. What?
It's driving itself.
Ah! Ah!
My friend Salim at Singularity University says that scream is the primal scream of humanity meeting exponential technologies. But I have to imagine the first time you walk into an elevator, an Otis elevator 100 years ago, and the thing is like, no, who's driving this thing? Right? We don't think about anything now. And after a few seconds of interest, you realize that autonomous cars are far safer, definitely than me as a driver. But the realization, people don't realize how this thing changes everything. What does that mean? I mean, the car companies should be scared because this leads to a reduction in the total number of cars. You don't buy a car now, you buy access to a car, right? You use your car, if you're lucky, 5%. The other 95% of the time, it's an idle asset not being utilized. So all of a sudden, if I can call on a Friday night a Ferrari for a date, and a Saturday when my in-laws are coming over, an SUV, and hopefully not, having a date and your in-laws, anyway, I won't go there. But you have on-demand access to whatever car you need and getting back all of your time. But it changes a lot of things, right? You don't have a parking garage anymore or a driveway because you don't need it. And you don't need as many roads. You can put 8 times the number of cars, parking density, or driving density on roads today. So you don't start building things. So Caterpillar should be concerned about the implications of this as well. The downstream implications of technologies that people don't think about. But of course, the other side is that the major cause of death for age 0 to, I think, age 10 is auto accidents. So we save that. And now all of a sudden cars get safer. And by the way, you don't need a 5,000-pound SUV to drive a 120-pound guy or gal around for safety to have this metallic womb around you because they don't crash. Now you can have a 1,000-pound car driving a person around. All of a sudden, you're saving all of that energy of having to carry that metal around. So the implications become very interesting for these technologies as they downstream. Another technology that I'm excited about is 3D printing. I'm on the board of 3D Systems. And this is the notion that you can manufacture anything layer by layer by layer from the bottoms up, and that complexity and personalization comes for free. This is a guy who's scanning a wrench because he forgot his wrench at other location, and you can imagine being able to 3D print a wrench and have the wrench working perfectly as soon as it comes out of the 3D printer, right? But when you're able to 3D print something, if I 3D print a solid block of material, or I 3D print a block with everybody's name on it and a million moving parts, the time it takes is identical, and the cost is identical, right? It's probably less for the more complex one because I have less material. So personalization and complexity comes for free. And today we can 3D print in 200 different materials, from work being done on human cells, or cells, I should say, to metals, plastics, rubbers, and so forth, and mixed materials as well, and color materials, all kinds of things. Here's a polygon within a polygon within a polygon. Here are high-temperature titanium turbine blades. GE's got a big program right now for the jet engine of the future, where you're actually manufacturing injectors that could not be manufactured with traditional manufacturing processes. They can only be 3D printed with additive manufacturing versus subtractive manufacturing. These are houses in China this year that were, 10 houses 3D printed in 24 hours for under $5,000 each. This is a person who lost his right lower limb, scanned his left, flipped the image, and printed a composite prosthetic. These are shoes and dresses. Imagine for the ladies here, being able to basically pick something online that was designed in Bangladesh that morning and then print it in your closet that afternoon. And the whole notion of metalworking, dentistry, and jewelry. So I love this example of this 3D printed gear ring that when it comes out of the printer, the gear ring works right away. My friend and business partner, Craig Venter, who in 2001 sequenced the first human genome. The cost back then was $100 million, 9 months of time. Today, of course, through Illumina, it's $1,000 and a microscopic fraction of the time. The 2010, the first synthetic cell. So we have a huge amount of progress going on in synthetic biology. I won't quote the multitude of things that Dr. Church is doing as well. But the area that's of interest and what was discussed, I won't talk about this in length, but in March of this year, I joined with Craig on the genomic side, and a fellow Bob Hariri, who is the chairman of Cell Gene Therapeutics and created the first placental-derived stem cell lines, to create a company called Human Longevity. And the mission for Human Longevity is how do we make 100 years old and you 60? How do we add 30 to 40 healthy years onto a person's life? Now, when I was in medical school, I remember seeing a show on sea turtles. And that show changed my life, because when I looked at this, I said these reptiles had multi-100-year lifespan. And I remember something that stuck with me when it said, theoretically, the oldest turtle could be as old as 700 years. And why they said that, I have no idea. I said, that's my target. So I said, if it can, why can't I? Now, of course, that's a ridiculous target, because if you can live a few hundred years, you can probably live forever. But I picked that number and I stuck with it. So all my friends know I've got, on my 50th birthday was 50 down, 650 to go. So what are we doing at HLI? Our mission is to create a data-driven company. So we are creating an objective of, by 2020, a million people, where we've got a very rich phenotypic database, where we've got haplotype phasing and full sequencing of those million people, where we have their entire microbiome sequenced, where we've got full body MRI, where we have the 2,400 chemicals in their bloodstream and their proteome basically in a database. We just were able to hire away from Google a guy named Franz Ock, who ran Google Translate, their top machine learning guy, who's now focused on machine learning for this. So the goal is a massive amount of data from which to extract as much knowledge and information. And the fact of the matter is, we're now in this decade where there will be a multitude of companies working on this. And that's a great thing for everybody, because one breakthrough gets another breakthrough, gets another breakthrough, and it's really a sweeping tide. So the vision that, you know, Aubrey has had for decades now and has been one of the most outstanding, outspoken individuals here, I think we have the potential to make a dent in it relatively soon. What I'm not talking about here is the therapeutic side. One of our investors is Celgene, and they've given us access to a number of their FDA-approved stem cell lines, where we're going to be looking at stem cell therapeutics. And of course, stem cells are a regenerative engine, if you would. So how do we rejuvenate that stem cell engine in our bodies? Right? I have 2 3-year-old boys at home, and coursing through their blood is a set of capabilities to repair everything in perfect ways. How do we rejuvenate that in ourselves? So a few critical insights here. The first is that the only constant is change, and the rate of change is increasing. You either disrupt your own company or products, and I do this, I talk about this for the top Fortune 100 companies out there, or someone else will. Standing still equals death. Competition is no longer the multinational overseas. It's now the guy or gal in the garage who's taking 1,000 shots on goal. 99.9% fail, but if one succeeds, you got 10 rock star companies out of that, right? And the fourth is, if you're dependent on innovation only inside your company, you're dead. And I talk about this a lot, that the importance of crowdsourcing innovation, the importance of going out to this hyper-connected world where entrepreneurs in the middle of every place now have access to cloud computing, and AI, and 3D printing, and all of these things. So where do you crowdsource your ideas? And I'll end in the last 10, 15 minutes with a quick conversation around XPrize and what we're doing there. Where's Ryan here? Ryan's in the back here. If you haven't met Ryan, Ryan is joined now to focus on XPrizes in life sciences, so you can meet him. So let's talk about, real quick, how do you crowdsource genius? And I'm very clear that, you know, XPrizes are a mechanism for getting lots of smart people around the world to focus on a problem. Not all problems can be solved by incentive prizes, and not all incentive prizes are XPrizes. But having said that, you know, you're looking at a 9-year-old space cadet here. That's where, you know, I got impassioned about space. I grew up during the tail end of Apollo, watching Star Trek, wanting to become an astronaut, went to medical school, got my pilot's license, drank all the Tang I could get my hands on, you know, really to become an astronaut, and then decided NASA was not going to be the means by which I did that. And so in 94, 20 years ago, I read this guy's book called The Spirit of St. Louis and learned that he crossed the Atlantic in 1927 not on a whim, but to win a $25,000 prize. That this one guy, Raymond Ortega, whose dream it was to fly between New York and Paris, puts up this $25,000 prize, and extraordinarily has 9 teams who spend $400,000 trying to win this $25,000 prize. And he doesn't pay any of the losers. He only pays the winner. And I go, that's it. That's the way I'm going to solve my problem. And so my problem was, how do I get myself into space if I wasn't going to go with NASA? And so I came up with the concept of this incentive prize. It was going to be a $10 million prize. I didn't have $10 million. I had to go and raise that. It'd be privately funded teams. You had to build a 3-person spaceship, go 100 kilometers up into space, land safely within 2 weeks, do it again. And extraordinarily, 8 years later, we had 26 teams from 7 countries around the world who had spent $100 million going after that prize. And October 4th, 10 years ago this October, Spaceship One made its second trip within 2 weeks to claim the $10 million. Here she is, and she's burning nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and polybutadiene tire rubber as the fuel. Very non-traditional. Here she is at altitude, and here's the winning moment. The Ansaris on the far left, who funded the prize, and Richard Branson on the far right, who came in the week before the prize was won and bought the winning technology to create Virgin Galactic. We had some 10 billion media impressions. Thanks to my good friend here, Keith Powers, Google put the Spaceship One over the Google Doodle. And let me take you back there with a short 1-minute video of what that felt like. We're announcing today something called the XPrize, a $10 million contest to privately build a spaceship that's able to carry 3 individuals, fly to 100 kilometers altitude, and do that twice inside of 2 weeks.
I have never been myself as creative as I have eyeballing this goddamn prize.
Hello and welcome to Mojave here in the high desert of California on this incredible day. Now you are going to witness history in the making.
Release arm fire.
The Ansari X PRIZE inspired international competition, drove regulatory reform, and made history.
The X PRIZE was $10 million.
It ignited a personal spaceflight revolution.
And now the winning vehicle, Spaceship One, is hanging in the Smithsonian right next to the Spirit of St. Louis that inspired it in the first place. On the heels of that, I was very lucky to build a rock star board of trustees from Larry Page and Elon Musk, Jim Cameron, Dean Kamen, Ray Kurzweil. And the organization now focuses on designing and launching prizes in areas that are stuck, where a prize would incentivize new entrepreneurs, incentivize new approaches, would transform regulatory structures, and would help move things where there's a sort of a set of roadblocks that need to be disrupted. And we're doing it in a range of different areas. In the healthcare field, I'm very proud that Paul Jacobs, now the chairman of Qualcomm, the Qualcomm Foundation, I had lunch with him and pitched him on this idea of can we create the tricorder from Star Trek? And he said, I love that idea. And they put up $20 million, 10 for the prize purse and 10 for operations. And we announced this at CES 2.5 years ago. And we had originally 330 teams enter the competition from 30 plus countries. We're down to the top 10, and we expect a winner in about 16 months. And so the concept is, of course, we're going to be short 100,000 doctors in the US by 2020, and that's great compared to the rest of the world, right? Africa's got 25% of the disease burden and 1.3% of the healthcare workers. You can never scale building hospitals or doctors. And the only thing that's going to scale is, can you have a device that is your diagnostician, that has AI, Watson on the cloud, you can speak to it, you can cough on it, you can do a finger blood prick and have it do diagnostics better than a team of board certified doctors. Where are we going next? I'm very proud we're getting ready to launch this prize in next month. The sister of healthcare is learning. We have 1 billion illiterate people on planet Earth. You know, a good 100 to 200 million of those are kids that will never get a school or teachers. And so we're asking teams around the world to build a piece of software that can operate on any Android tablet, that can take a child who is illiterate, where there's no school, no adult, and within 18 months take them from illiteracy to basic reading, writing, and numeracy. And we're getting ready to launch that, and we hope we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of teams competing. And at the end, it really is about, in this competition, the winning technology will be open sourced, and our goal is to put it on every tablet and every smartphone that goes out there. So there's a basic literacy application on every device that's put out there into the world. In the healthcare field, we're working on an Alzheimer's X Prize. We're figuring out what is an Alzheimer's X Prize. Is it for early diagnostics? Is it for a cure? What is it? We're working with a large brown fizzy soda company on a happiness X Prize. If I were to ask you, when were you happiest yesterday or last Friday? The chances are you don't really know. And I think it's, for me, the concept of being able to have a device that is able to measure my state of happiness and help correlate that with what I'm doing to help me know when I'm happiest would be significantly valuable for people. And then one of the areas we're working on, again with the Organ Preservation Alliance, and Ryan, you can talk to Ryan about, is organogenesis. We have a team a group of philanthropists who have funded us to do the design of an organogenesis X Prize. And what is that prize? Is it going from a skin cell to a pluripotent stem cell to regrowing your heart, liver, lung, or kidney? I don't know yet. We're in the middle. We're just beginning design of that. But the notion that you have to wait for someone to die to get an organ transplant will seem barbaric in 10 years. So we're think about life science prizes. If you've got ideas, don't talk to me. Talk to Ryan. I'm actually needing to jump back to SU into a lunar think tank session right now. But if you want a copy of these slides, if you text your name and email to this phone number, my server will automatically download you a PDF of the slides. So let me break on this and say, let's have some Q&A for a couple minutes. Is that good with you? Thank you.